Good morning, everyone. This open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by a video conference pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 as extended on July 16th, 2022. This meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating remotely via Zoom as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all phones and devices. Members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting must use their full name for Zoom access. If full names are not used, people will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. The town reserves the right to remove any member of the public from the meeting who doesn't use their full name or who acts inappropriately. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public who have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. If you're not able to participate in the remote meeting, you may also submit comments to the Coastal Resilience Coordinator, Vince Murphy, to be read into the meeting record. His email is vmurphy@nantucket-ma.gov. Confirming member access, I'm Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Permit me to confirm all members and persons anticipated in the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Gary Beller.
Here.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Peter Brace.
Here.
Matt Fee.
Here.
Rachel Freeman.
Here.
Ian Golding.
Here.
I don't see Jen Carberg at the moment. Christy Kickham.
Here.
I don't see Joanna Roach. Joe Topham.
Here.
And Mary Longacre here. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
And I'll note that Morgan Sale is also here. Morgan, you want to say hello to us this morning?
Sorry, technical difficulties. Hello, everybody.
Welcome, Morgan.
Thank you.
We do not have any anticipated speakers on the agenda who are not committee members. So finally, I'll note that each vote in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. And I see Joanna Roach is just joining us. So Joanna, when you get here, go ahead and say hello. All right. The first item on our agenda is an update on grants from Vince Murphy.
Thanks, Mary. So the first big news, and it's not news, I'm sorry to say, we still haven't heard back from CZM. They promised to get back to us in August. That's the way that it works. There's a couple of days left in the month. As soon as I have news, I will send a note to all committee members. Fingers crossed it'll be good news. So fall is the start of the grant season, or the fall grant season again. So we're nearly there in September. So the bits that I'm going to be keeping an eye out for and to see the grants as they come out were going to be things like there's an organization called Sea Grant. They frequently do resilience grants, but they also do grants for things like pier maintenance and that kind of thing. So if we could find something that would work for us in one of our recommendations, and we could make it match up, we could look at a grant application there as well. NOAA has just announced they have almost $3 billion in bipartisan funding over the next 5 years. It's not for 1 year. This is a 5-year thing, and this is from a Biden administration announcement for historic coastal and climate resilience funding, and this is going to be administered through NOAA. The other one that I am looking around for at the moment is MEMA, not FEMA, but MEMA, the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, the state level. They will be coming out with some grants. They do a lot of grants for hazard mitigation, and they will be related to our hazard mitigation plan that happened before the Coastal Resilience Plan. As it would happen, there are things mentioned in the HMP that are also in the CRP. So it would be beneficial and help cross things off, not one, but two lists potentially, if we could find something to work with that. And I'm going to put out my general call, as I always do, and thanks to the committee members who send me things all the time. If you come across any grant information or anything that you think might work, or anything just worth reading about, please send it to me. We'll see if we can make something work from what people find. So the usual charge to all CRAP members, find some grants, please.
Thank you, Vince. I'm sure we'll have an eagle eye out for you. Next item on our agenda is any questions for Vince on grants? Yes, Gary.
I have a question for Vince.
Vince, I thought in the town's budget, I thought they were providing, did they give us some additional funding for hiring either you or the National Resource or the Natural Resources Department for hiring a grant writer? Did we get any funding for that from the town in the last budget?
So this is something more for my boss, Jeff Carlson, to look into. There was a discussion about a grant writer for somebody that would work between a few different departments. Natural resources and health were mentioned at one point. I don't know where that's going. It's at a level above me, I'm afraid to say.
Thank you, Vince. Any other comments or questions on the grants? Okay, we will go on to the next item on the agenda. Rachel Freeman is going to give us a presentation, just an update on the land bank's coastal resilience efforts. Rachel?
Hi, I am wondering if I can share my screen.
Give me 1 second and you will. Okay, Rachel.
And you're on mute now, Rachel. Don't know how that happened.
It's really funny. I don't actually have this issue in other meetings. I don't know why my mute button and cracked. Don't get along. Okay, so thanks for asking me to speak today. Basically, what
I'm sorry, Rachel, are you intending to be sharing your screen right now?
Yes, I'm in the process of doing
Okay.
that as we talk.
There we go.
So basically what I am intending to do today is do a little bit of a summary of a Washington Street project that was presented to the Land Bank Commission on August 9th. And I'm going to be pulling slides from the presentation put together by Scape and the Woods Hole Group. Just to give the committee an overview, some of the main areas that I can think of that we're working on projects that have coastal resiliency aspects are moving the Cisco parking lot. And that is going to be a retreat. And the reason that I mean, there's a lot of coastal resiliency considerations here, but Vince had some important design component comments, which were really helpful about parking areas that are parallel with the shoreline versus perpendicular to the shoreline as you sort of proceed with the retreat process. So that has been an interesting awareness to incorporate coastal resiliency, not just like it was just something that I hadn't considered before, that when you're retreating, if you turn something perpendicular, you're actually physically losing less. So that is one project. And then the other project that we're working on, which really hasn't gotten very far yet, which will have a large coastal resiliency component, is we just signed a contract also with Scape and the Woods Hole Group to take over the planning for Kansu Springs. This is a project that's been in development for a really long time, and we sort of hit a standstill. And we really want to be incorporating more aspects of coastal resiliency. We're looking at the bike path and the berm area there and how that can function as a component of coastal resiliency, while also allowing for marsh restoration. And it's just a really complicated project. So we've had such a great experience with Scape and the Woods Hole Group that we just recently met with them out there and, are picking up where we left off. And, hopefully we're continuing to work with the town on stormwater issues in that area, but it will have a very large coastal resiliency component. The other one, before I jump into Washington Street, that I just wanted to touch base on was East Creek. East Creek is an area where we just recently purchased 19 East Creek, and there is a house there. And let's see, I'm actually just gonna bring this up because I have my rendering in here. There is currently a house at 19 East Creek Road, And we are proposing to, do what the land bank does, which is create it into a public open space. And the reason that I chose this slide is because one of the things that we're really focusing on in this area, and this is not permitted, this is really draft design. This isn't even final design work, but one of the things that we're really heavily emphasizing at this site is the potential for marsh migration. So right now where the boardwalk is a house and a hard driveway. If we did allow public access to a boardwalk, you could really facilitate marsh migration in this area and allow that to basically just move inland as it chose to. So that's another example of a small element of coastal resiliency that's coming into our 19 East Creek Road project. And then really the big project that I want to share today is just really an update on where we are at with our Washington Street planning. And this is an interesting project because it's really a comprehensive planning process, and Vince has been integrally involved in that we're looking at the whole area, basically from, all along Washington Street. And in amongst that, giant area, we're pulling out certain places that are a specific place, basically the intersection of Francis Street and Washington Street, which I'll show you in a second, where we can focus right now. We have either we own it or the town owns it. So there's ownership. We have a good collaboration going there. Remain is assisting with funding for the town's planning process along, as a component of this framework plan. And that is huge because that's really that's enabled us to do this kind of larger scale planning. So just to give you an idea of some of the 3 topics that we're really focused on in this area, and this is why I started with this slide, is we're looking at water, obviously, as a component of coastal resiliency. We're hoping to absorb, buffer, and embrace water. We're also looking at habitat restoration and cultivating healthy habitats so that we can have resilient habitats that can manage storms and so continue to exist going forward and be adaptable as conditions change. And as of course, it's incredibly important to the land bank to have public access. And so we are looking at how we support access and recreation along Washington Street. And that is a component of Nantucket's economy. So this is another big piece of it that we've talked a lot with Vince about, is we are recognizing that through our work and through natural solutions, we have the potential to actually extend the lifespan of Washington Street. And it's a critical transportation and trucking route, and the town currently is looking into things like the downtown flood barrier and raising Washington Street. And those are all likely necessary projects. But in the meantime, there is potential for the land bank to create natural solutions where we're raising elevations as a component of a public park, so that maybe we're reducing daily high tide flooding and thereby basically extending the life of this road so that the town has additional time to establish what their game plan is and what their goals are. The other piece that I just really want to emphasize is working with the Woods Hole Group and SCAPE. We are doing everything we can to make this the most flexible design I've ever worked on, because all of these are probabilities. Sea level rise is probability. It's constantly evolving science. And another component of that we don't have total control over is ownership. The land bank does not own all these parcels. The town does not own all these parcels. So whether or not people want to collaborate with us, is out there. So we're talking about stormwater increases, but we don't really know by how much. We have these models that are, like I said, constantly evolving. So we go with the best science that we have at the time, but we're constantly reevaluating. And so flexibility is just a really, really important component of this project. This gives you an idea of just kind of some of the areas that we're looking at. It's just, again, really to expand and maintain waterfront access. A few of these slides I'm going to really skip through pretty quickly. But I felt like this was kind of the best way to talk about what we're doing down here. And then the other piece of this, so we have the coastal piece, right, with sea level rise and beach access. And then, we have the stormwater flooding and also coastal flooding. And so we're also looking at inland parcels as well. And some of these areas we own and some of them we don't, but we're looking at all of them and just sort of thinking outside the box and looking at where our flood pathways are. And as we go through some of this, when we look at the ways that we're actually prioritizing these different areas of Washington Street, and this was an interesting concept to me. The way Scape does this is they basically create what they refer to as typologies. So they're blocks of parcels or spaces that have a designated use, basically. And the designated use is based on what we feel like is the right answer environmentally and for coastal resiliency and public access. So this kind of shows you where we're looking at. They've suggested, prioritizing demonstration and interpretation habitats. There's the public component, prioritizing restoration habitats in the middle, and prioritizing stormwater habitats on the other side, so that we can actually start to store some of the stormwater that we know is out there and flooding roads in other places. One thing I will point out is there's been a long, lengthy discussion about parking lots, and they have to be there, is what it kind of comes down to. It's a really important feature, and they're not going anywhere, but how do we make them a component of coastal resiliency? So how do we make them pervious? How do we make them have swales? How do we use them for stormwater and groundwater flooding as we go forward? So I am going to skip over this part and head down to right here, which actually gives you an idea over Washington Street, if we're looking at all of Washington Street. And some of these slides have been shown before. Kind of the overall concept is to have basically, where it says ADA access is basically an 8-foot high multi-use path that would deal with, mean high water through 2070 being at 6 feet, and the potential for the deck and the ADA access, which is basically a very large berm and a multi-use path, to keep Washington Street dry while the town's, working on either raising Washington Street or a downtown flood barrier, has presented itself here. We have also, created a utility zone and trying to work with the town to make sure that there's availability for those types of things. But basically the concept, the biggest coastal resiliency concept here or one, I shouldn't say the biggest, but it's kind of major. It's the part that really strikes me, is this elevated berm, basically, which is a multi-use path that allows biking and walking, all the way down into town. Again, since we don't own all of Washington Street, there's components of this that need to be worked out. But this is where we're starting. This is what we would love to see happen, because we think it's a really good idea. This is the concept design, which is the specific area that we were working in. And this is the area that we've been really working with the town and, as I said, Remain and, Land Bank and Scape and Woods Hole Group to come up with to integrate all these pieces, stormwater, to reduce coastal flooding, beach access, all these different types of components. And it turns out, if you look at this area, which we have Washington Street and Francis Street is the vertical street here, you have basically land bank property on the left, actually all of the left, and town property is all of the right. So that was kind of a neat opportunity to look at some design work here and use this as a really interesting place to start. It felt really good. It's also an area where we have a flood pathway issue. We have, common road flooding. And so Scape has put together this preliminary design that we've basically started to share with the public. It incorporates stormwater wetlands on the upland side of Washington Street. And it also maintains this existing parking lot that is there now. There's the understanding, and this, again, there's so many unknowns, so this has to be a flexible design, is that at some point the Saltmarsh Center will move, which is, now becoming a stormwater wetland, but that the town feels that this is really important parking. So we're working on maintaining that. And then access to the beach. But again, you'll see that as you get towards Washington Street on the beach side, there's an 8-foot high berm, it's a dune, and there will be a multi-use path that stretches right along the edge of Washington Street in an effort to basically stop that sunny day flooding that's happening or minimize it. These are just, they always do inspirational images, which okay, the woman with the high heels sitting right here is, we might have to, I don't know, edit her shoes. They don't work very well in Nantucket. But anyways, this is just to give people an idea that it's not going to be, we're trying to make it in keeping with Nantucket because we know these designs are outside of the box. They're not things we're used to seeing, particularly for the Conservation Commission. Nobody wants Nantucket to be Disney World. So how do we really keep this natural, keep it low key, while being effective at the same time? And this is just a couple other renderings. Again, these are very preliminary drawings, but just to give you an idea, there's decking, and as I said, this back elevation is really 8 feet, focusing on stormwater and these upland sides, acknowledging that there's a kayak rental here and maintaining that use. The other piece that I guess I haven't mentioned, which is really important for the town and the land bank and Remain, is all of this is ADA accessible. So that's why you see a lot of these boardwalks are sloped. And so you can actually, achievably get to any of these deck viewing points, if your mobility is compromised. This is a view facing south, which frankly for me doesn't really do much. This is that suite of condos that is over by Great Harbor Yacht Club. And just gives you a little bit of a better idea that, there are pieces of this that are pretty elevated. And then this is looking north towards the town pier. And again, keeping in mind that it's an elevated beach deck. So basically, as you reach Washington Street, you're climbing up, there's a topographic feature, but it has a very important function. And these are some of the views of the stormwater garden. Obviously, these are going to be sometimes very dry, and sometimes are going to be completely full of water, but combined with the backflow prevention system, they could store water until the tide is low enough for it to go out, and water could be directed to these areas so that it's not in the middle of the road. And I think that was all I wanted to say today. I think I really went over my time, but I'm sorry.
I didn't get it more. So Rachel, I'm sorry, any comments or questions from commissioners for Rachel? Peter, and then Sarah, and then Christy.
Yeah, good morning, Rachel. Thanks for the presentation. It's a real eye opener for me anyway. and as a member of the Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, we have been tracking what's happening at Petrel Landing, and I'm wondering where that is in the process. I know there's some sort of pending lawsuit and how that might figure into your plans here.
Yeah, we actually recently had, after many years, received a draft decision from the DEP Office of Dispute Resolution, and the draft decision was in our favor. So it is in litigation, and my understanding from Jesse and the attorneys is that the draft decision really doesn't change. And then once the final decision is issued, there's, I believe, a 30-day appeal period. And then it would be a question as to whether or not the abutter chooses to appeal that decision again. And we are hoping they don't, obviously. And, you know, in that case, if it doesn't get appealed, we will be rapidly incorporating that into this area. Once we get into more concrete design plans, you know, things that we've discussed there are, you know, there's a huge stormwater issue, that there's a ton of sediment that comes in and into that area. And, you know, it probably is best suited in a lot of ways environmentally for a marsh and, you know, living shoreline. And, but Petrel Landing is, you know, designed right now to have a floating dock and to have that be a component of the design. And I doubt that will change. But we are definitely going to have Woods Hole Group review. Once we know that we can move forward, Woods Hole Group is going to look at modeling how, like what we can do to make the area sort of coastally resilient and incorporate into this plan. So, does that help?
Yeah, that helps. And I had, if you don't mind, Mary, I had another question.
Go ahead, Peter.
Okay, so back in like maybe 2007 or 6 or 5, I can't remember what the date was, the land bank, I think, bought life rights to the Odison property so that when the Odisons are expended, then you guys get that lot. And I guess maybe that bridges between the Hayes property and the property that's right there with the parking lot at the end of West Creek Road. And I know that, you know, from my Nantucket Beacon days all the way through the Nantucket Independent days, that the town had been striving to create some sort of walking, biking route that went from the Rotary all the way to the rail bed and kept everybody off of Orange Street because, well, for obvious reasons. I'm just wondering if that is stuff that you guys think about, or if that's works into this plan or whatever.
That is a big component of this plan and of the greater thought process. Just to skip back, let me just bring up the town GIS quickly. Where so if we go, you know, up here, the land bank owns this, and we have, you know, the Odisons are basically leasing these areas for varying amounts of time. And then we're actually taking over public access down in this area in the fall. So it gradually over time becomes public access. The land bank owns this, and then this is 19 East Creek. So, and we own 16 East Creek. And as I said, we're looking at Consu Springs, and it goes from there. So yes, this is very much on our radar. A bike path, multi-use path has been brought up any number of times. Remain has been extremely supportive of that. That's actually a planning initiative that they started a number of years ago and had plans for. And so that is a huge topic for us and a huge component of all of this planning effort. And it's exciting because I feel like there's a lot of connectivity here, and that's when that starts to be able to happen. So I can't really say more than that, but yes.
Sure. Thank you
A lot
very
of
much.
talk about that.
Appreciate the explanation.
Yep.
Okay, Sarah was next, and then Christy.
Yeah,
Yeah, thanks. I just more had a comment for Rachel in general in the land bank. I just really appreciate sharing this with us, but also seeing that the land bank takes very seriously the combination, right, of the certainly the public access piece, which I know a lot of people, we've heard over time that people have been worried about in different ways, the ecological restoration piece with when possible, and then the coastal flooding and stormwater management. I think sometimes when we talk about it, we talk about those things as separate. So I think the land bank being able to move forward on this, not quickly, obviously nothing happens quickly,
Yeah.
but as an example, I think this is a really great, big scale project. And I'm sure within this planning, there's going to be lots of different phases and lots of different projects, but it's the true example of what we need to see happen, right? There's all these different needs of our community coming together and they're being met in different ways. And I think even the appreciation and understanding of the need for parking, but then how do we make that parking the best? It's not an all or nothing. And I think I just really applaud what you guys are doing and how, working, also collaboratively with the town and Remain. I just think this is such a great example of what, what we're all hoping for in many parts of the island. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, and Christy, and then Ian has his hand up after that.
Yeah, I was going to ask Rachel. Rachel, the property at 19 East Creek, if I remember correctly, there's a dock for that property. Would that be considered for public use, or would you guys be removing that? I'm guessing if we remove it, we would never be able to put it back in, but I just thought I'd ask about that.
Yep, right now we do have, it's even lower level than the Washington Street concept design, so I didn't really bring it out yet, but we do have that dock as a component of the design. So that would maintain as a public dock. The footprint of it, we're not planning to change. It still shows as a T dock in the design. The aspects that we're trying to balance there are, can we make it ADA accessible? And if so, where are we at with, the 1 to 1.5 regulation width to height for DMF and various DEP regulations. So we're in the balancing act of trying to figure those out. But yes, the current plan is to maintain the existing dock, whether or not we have to, and like I said, exactly it's the same structure, but whether or not we have to make it wider might be, in order for it to be public, might be required. So.
Got it. And just Mary, if I can, just a follow up. Yeah, I think that dock is stationary, meaning I don't think it's a floating dock.
No,
Does make it difficult if the tide's low. Last time I saw it, which was maybe a year ago, it wasn't in the best shape, but just some thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've been working with the Conservation Commission and Jeff Carlson just to maintain it so that it's still not in the best of shape, but so it is seeing some love. And our field crew has been picking away and occasionally replacing a board that comes out. So it is a floating dock, and it is a stationary dock, and at low tide, it does not promote accessibility to the water, although there is a ladder.
Thank you.
All right, Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. And Christy actually absolutely asked one of the questions I was going to ask, because I'm really pleased that the land bank has bought 19 East Creek Road. They were before us on the Conservation Commission a number of times, and I think, Joe, that was while you were on Concom when they wanted to raise the building and have cantilevers to increase the footprint and have a massive array of windows. And so it's just wonderful news that the land bank has it. But I would urge you to keep the public dock. That's marvelous canoeing and kayaking. And so, let the bon temps rouler. Let's continue, getting public access to the water. Thank you.
Well, no, he was going to get all.
Thank you, Ian. Matt, do you have comments?
Yep, sorry, I was talking to someone else. But I do have a comment, but let Ian finish.
I think Ian was done.
Yeah, no, I've finished. I'm just really
Oh,
pleased.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yep.
not
No,
at all.
I'll second that. I'm very pleased as well. It was, it's great. The one thing I will say, looking at it, I understand politically we have to talk about the parking lots, but I hope that over the next few years, we start to realize we're gonna lose 30 or 40 miles of roads. We can't do things the way we're doing them. And parking lots and, maybe one of the things, we have to find a better way possibly to move people around at high tide or at peak summer than single family vehicles. And the land is way too valuable for housing and or for resiliency to, be taking things away to make parking lots. I know I'm sort of the only one talking like that, but I'm going to keep at it because I think it's, we've got to find what is our way to do it. We've got to be thinking of other things than just how we've always done it. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. In supporting the parking lots, I think I should amend what I was saying. So I do agree with Matt. I think we need to rethink in terms of, people driving into town and visitors and, if workers getting into town. I think I'm particular to that parking lot there because of the working waterfront. And I think that if the town pier remains to be there, I think there needs to be a spot for people to be able to haul gear and do whatever they need to do. And we don't want to eliminate things that make the industries of the island possible because, we have to marry that need in the community as well. So I just wanted to, that's kind of where I'm more interested in, that piece of access, as well as the recreational access of definitely like access for kayaks, access for people to, to bring a fishing pole down to the creeks or whatever, bird watching, et cetera, are important. But we also, recognize that there is that working waterfront. We need to be able to support that as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Gary, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. Rachel, thanks. That was a great presentation. I was glad to see that included in those plans were areas for stormwater runoff. I know that a little further north, much closer towards Children's Beach and in the Grand Point area, there's a lot of issues with stormwater runoff. Are the pools or the ponds that you are setting up, are they intended to address that, or is that really a much separate subject?
In some ways they are intended to do that. What I will say is we haven't gotten to a design place where we're actually looking at, do we have, and I'm pulling this knowledge from Lily Ponds, just so you know, so this has been discussed at that level there. Do we have a grit chamber somewhere? Do we use a sediment forebay? What mechanism, or do we just allow the stormwater filter in directly? What mechanisms and what designs are we going to use? Because just in creating these areas to store stormwater, they'll naturally filter right through the ground when they're leaving. So there will be some filtration component, but whether or not, and they will lose sediment one way or another. And it's whether we choose infrastructure, or a natural solution that then is maintained over time above ground. I mean, infrastructure has to be maintained too. So I think it's a question for design, but yes, but mostly just kind of by the nature of creating an area that stormwater can sit. That's sort of how we're, and naturally filter. So we're trying to use natural filtration processes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Any other comments from committee members? Rachel?
I just wanted to add one thing in. It's kind of what Matt was talking about and Sarah was talking about in terms of the parking areas. One of the reasons we're we're saying that we should keep them is because we feel like there's a great need for them now. But I will say, and the reason I zoomed out on my screen, and then I'm going to stop screen sharing, is that we're actually looking at, you know, everything from the Milestone Rotary all the way down, you know, past Children's Beach. And we have thought about, you know, the multimodal transportation, like, you know, so we're talking about biking, we're talking about the wave, we're talking about actually even like harbor shuttles, you know, that could have stopping points through some of these different areas, you know, basically like a little ferry that takes people places. And so we, you know, in the background, while we recognize that town parking is important in that area now, and it is very important for the working waterfront. You know, what that looks like going forward, it is something that we're sort of brainstorming about in the background. So.
Thank you, Rachel. Vince?
There's one other aspect of the car parks I'm kind of excited about. If we were to change the surface of the car parks, at the moment they're just hard surfaces, and what that does is that creates runoff. So you get literally thousands of gallons of water just having to go to the roads and go to the harbour or to neighbouring wetlands. But if the surface of the car parks was changed, then they become sink areas where it could literally soak away water and not have to send it to the roads and car parks. And that has its own inherent and inbuilt advantages and would increase resilience and decrease water levels in the area during flood times. So I can only see benefits in that.
Thank you, Vince. Matt?
Yeah, no, and I agree with all that, Vince. But here's just, we've known since the 90s during the comp plan days, we had consultants then with traffic, and they were warning us that Old South Road and Five Corners and Surfside were all going to be locked up tight, and it was going to be a mess. And we all said, well, that'll never happen, and we'll never get to that many cars, and that'll never happen. And it's actually proved to be true within about the time frame, maybe even quicker than they said. One of the things that they said about downtown, which is why I'm bringing this up, is I said, okay, if we keep adding 200 plus cars a year, what happens to downtown? What happens to, you know, to those areas? And they said, typically what will happen is initially you'll close one road downtown, and that will make the ones around a little busier. Then you'll have to close 2 or 3 roads downtown, and that will make all the other roads even busier. And then eventually you're going to have to pick one road as your ingoing road and one as your outgoing road. So Orange Street, let's pretend, is outgoing and Washington is ingoing. And the only people that can go on that are buses and taxis, and everything else around will get even busier. So that's, you know, that is the traditional way to handle those traffic issues. So I like to think that we would find another way to handle that than closing the roads and making everything else worse, you know? And so that's why I keep bringing that up, because we've, you know, though we have those reports, we have that, you know, sort of direction, and that's where we're going to go. And I keep thinking, can we go another direction? And it's great to hear that it's part of the thought process. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Any other committee comments? All right, I want to pause here and give the members of the public who are in attendance an opportunity to comment on Rachel's presentation on the land banks plan. Are there any members of the public with comments? You can use the raise hand feature, or you can unmute and identify yourself. All right, if there are none, then we will move on to the next item on the agenda. A recap from Vince Murphy from his meeting with the Tuckanuck Land Trust a week ago or so. Vince? And thank you, Rachel, for that information. I really enjoyed the presentation.
Yeah, Rachel's a tough act to follow, apparently, because she's going from one of the most populous and most densely used areas, and I'm going to talk about Tuckanuck, which is kind of a polar opposite of sorts. So how about a hard left turn here, people? All right, Mary, can I ask you a favor, please? Could you keep an eye on the participants just to make sure
Yes.
we have people while I'm doing this, please? I'm just going to move a few things around on screen. Okay. Move that there. Okay, everyone should be able to see this in presentation mode in a second. In presentation mode, all happy?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through this as quickly and as briefly as I can. The reason why I'm presenting this, I presented this to the Tuckernuck Land Trust to their speaker series. I understand one or two other people, including Sarah, actually got to present on Tuckernuck as well this year. So thanks for that. I just had to say a quick thank you early and probably often to the Tuckernuck Land Trust because they got me over there. They paid for the ferry and sorted all that out. So Sunday morning on the 14th, I got to go out and speak there for a couple of hours. And I got to have a little look around Tuckernuck as well. This is the first map that I presented on Tuckernuck, and I was delighted to see that it was already on a wall hanging inside the ranger shack, the ranger station when I was there. This is a well-known map to them, and it proved to be a good starting point because they knew this. This is something that I presented in various different ways for this information from Morris, Massachusetts Ocean Research and Information System, to crack meetings in the past. So it's information all the way from 1844 right up to 2009. And there's a couple of bits that to take away from this. First of all, in 1844 to 1897, there were much larger island and other sandbars and protective features in front of Tuckernuck. But what strikes me and what catches my eye is the black line, which is the most recent one from 2007 to 2009, and how that's so radically different from the current coastline and where it is from an aerial photograph from September 2021. So, 9 years only, 12 years only, and there's a very visible gulf of a difference in here. So the next thing that I showed was this. This is also information from Morris. I highlighted a few of these because they're small, they're hard to read, and the kind of key takeaways is what I wanted to point out was that everything in here in these individual transects is always a negative number. There's no accretion on the south shore there at all. I'm just going to highlight a couple in red that you can see here. Minus 21 feet per year, minus 22 feet per year, minus 19 feet per year. This is information from Morris, something we've seen here before, something that's been used in the CRP and in other presentations in the past. I have this for 3 sections. I got kind of the northern part or the western part, the central mid part of the island where you see numbers decreasing down to 12 feet and almost 9 feet, and then down to around the 5-foot range down here. And then as you get close to Whale Point, you have the 5 foot there again, and another around about 5 foot, and a massive jump up to 15 feet. So this shows the erosion rate on the south facing or the southwest facing shore. This also belabors a different point. Other research has also happened and taken place on Tuckernuck in more recent years that suggests in a shorter time frame than this, that it's closer to 32 feet. So that would also suggest that the erosion rate is accelerating. I think it was a guy called Richard Lineman undertook that work. But we have the state information. That's what we use as a standard.
And Vince, we don't have any real idea where that sand is going. Is that correct?
No, we need a sediment transport study to understand that. But I imagine, not that I can confirm this in any way, but I think it's similar to Smith's in that it's generally a westerly flow, so more or less heading for Muskeget. But I have only aerial photographs to support that. I've no real good evidence for that. So we've seen these. The next thing is something that I feel a bit sad about. We know this information at this point very well. This is the erosion hazard mapping that FEMA did a few years ago. And Nantucket, as I love to say, was the first place in the whole country to get this. They did Smith's Point, but they didn't do Tuckernuck. And all I can infer from this, because this isn't good information, because the erosion rate on esters in Smith's Point is less, but roughly comparable, very roughly, to Tuckernuck. You could imagine in your mind transposing this across onto Tuckernuck and seeing what would you think? I'm imagining in myself about a third to half the island gone by the end of the century again, but that is something that I can't prove because we don't have information on it. Sad that that didn't happen. So when I was looking at Tuckernuck and trying to understand various places around the island, I looked at all of the buildings and that were within 1,000 feet of the eroding southwest facing shore. And a couple jumped out at me. There's one that's about 200 feet, one that's down to about 140 feet. And just so that everyone can know, I'm going to come back to this one here, this one building here that's marked as 250 feet as of September 2019. When we got to the question and answer section, people had a very different measurement for that. Now I'm just going to ask people to remember that for when we come back to it. So yeah, a lot of buildings kind of in what you might call the threat zone there for the next few decades. I also looked at some aerial photographs. These are from the town GIS system, the exact same GIS system Rachel had up a few minutes ago. The red line on all of these is the September 2019 coastline. I just traced it out and I imposed it on the 1998, 2007, 2014 and 2018. Even since 2018, there you can see what is lost in that kind of 3-year time frame from 2018 to 2021, which this red line represents. Pretty severe erosion. And then this is where I changed from talking about the erosion issues and moving on to the flooding and sea level rise part of what might affect Tuckernuck into the future. As we always do, I am using the NOAA high scenario. I'm just guessing that the committee will use that with the next recommendation. It seems reasonable to me. So that's what I did while looking at this for the 2022 projections, not the 2017 projections which we had before. So roughly 6 feet of sea level rise. What would that do to Tuckernuck? Well, it becomes a couple of different islands. There's one kind of island here. I've forgotten the name of this area here. Somebody might be able to refresh me. I remembered it the other day. This kind of washed through area. It's a developing wetland at the moment.
Slough.
Thank you, Peter.
Slough.
Appreciate that. The slough washes through effectively at high tide and you end up with 2 islands. There's also potential under older scenarios that this area would break up here as well and you'd have a 3rd island up here over time potentially. So I also showed everybody the MCFRM and this is the present day flooding as it is. I like to tell everyone the darker colors are what are more likely and the much brighter colors are less likely as denoted by the very small percentage evaluations to the side of them. But what's interesting is when you play this through in the 4 timeframes we now have, you can watch the slough meet up and get darker over time, increasing the probability, increasing the chances of washing through and creating 2 different islands and connectivity issues on Tuckernuck. So just to move forward to 2030, it gets darker. Then by 2050, it meets up and there's a lot more darker colors getting into the 10 and 20% type range right through the center in these purples. And then by 2070, you're down to the kind of 50% probabilities and dark colors right through the center. And this is where I was talking about a different island up in this area potentially, where these might get washed through in storm events. So everybody's seeing this slide. I'm just going to go show all parts of it quickly because I've talked about this so many times. The committee members will have seen it several times, but I wanted to specifically point out to the homeowners in Tuckernuck what they can do for themselves and the basic adaptation strategies that are out there of accommodate, protect and retreat. For the most part on Tuckernuck, I would think retreat might be the way to go. And I said that directly in the meeting. But now is the time to look at your property, evaluate your property and see what you might need to do in terms of where you might need to retreat to on Tuckernuck and what might be possible and what might frankly not be possible. I then wanted to see what the town, what the CRP and the town could do in general. In the CRP, there's basically 2 things that are related to Tuckernuck. And this is basically about connectivity. The F Street boat ramp being further inland than Jackson's Point at Smith, by the Smith's Village area, is a more F Street is more resilient, otherwise known as Barrett's Pier. This is the more resilient place to increase the height of the boat ramp, make sure that boat ramp lasts longer into the future so that people can come and go to Tuckernuck and Muskeget. We also looked at the idea of the sediment transport study for the harbours and also including Tuckernuck to see what sediment issues they're going to have, because when you look at aerial photographs, you can see the parts of Whale Point are starting to extend north, and there's a bar developing in front of their landing area on Tuckernuck. So would that be something we might need to consider, undertaking the sediment transport study there and potentially looking at some dredging to maintain access into their current harbour area? As I explored that idea, and if you follow it down the road many years, if there is dredging, there might be some sand material that might be of use for a resilience project on Tuckernuck. Don't know what form that would be, other than to say the sand will be available. I then went to this slide to just look at one very particular piece. This is the description about what will be needed to be done for the F Street boat ramp over the next few decades. And the only big thing to take into account here is the capital cost of about 3.7 million. And then with the contingency about 4.5 to 5 million to get that boat ramp up to par where it would last a great many decades to maintain connectivity for Muskeget and just general use in that area. So I had my summation slide. Basic idea is maintain connectivity to Tuckernuck. Talking about the F Street boat ramp and the studies. And then I had a conversation with the people that were in the room about what might be, about the things that I didn't know about their pier and the operation, their piers and their various sets of piers and the operations of those, and how those piers could be adapted over time, potentially, I don't know, as floating docks or something to that effect, so that they could maintain their piers there and take them out of the water, quite frankly, during storm events, and then relaunch them as needed. The other thing, when I was looking at the land ownership, a lot of houses are within the middle of their lot and have some area within their property bounds that they might be able to move within. Obviously, this would require CONCOM permitting for some of them, but it's an option that retreat is possible for a great many of the houses, not necessarily all of them. One or two are in the corners of their lots. And then I ended with an open question that started a lovely debate and a lovely conversation. What can the town do to assist with Tuckernuck for erosion, flooding and sea level rise planning? And one of the participants in the room had a very forward thinking idea, and it came up quite early on, is to assist so that if a storm were to damage their landing area, could the town help with putting a plan in place to get the area back in order? So this isn't anything other than a paper plan for what might need to be done and understanding what funding might be needed to help make or restore the landing area on Tuckernuck. So they're relatively happy to undertake a lot of this work themselves, as I understand, or with minimal funding from the town or assistance from the town, but just to have that backup plan in place. If their area was lost, how would they get there? How would they land there? And what would be acceptable? I always end with my favorite slide, talking about resilience as a cycle, took people through what this means and all and how we're always aiming to improve resilience. Got to have a nice photograph with everyone in the room that was there on the day. My new Tuckernuck friends, including Ranger Rick on the left. Got to have a look at the erosion on the south shore, which is severe in places. This is standing on the south shore looking west and then looking east. And these are my takeaways from the rest of it. I told you about that house at towards the northwest that was 250 feet. One of the things that people were telling me is now it's about 70 feet. That's 70 feet, sorry, that's about 180 foot loss in 11 months, which is staggering. People were concerned about the mapping as there were a lot of dense information, because you present this quickly to people they take time to absorb it. What I did was to make sure that I could have time with this, and I knew that I wouldn't have audiovisual assistance. I printed out the presentation and I brought many copies, more than I needed, and then people had that to take away. I gave them my contact information so they could call me and let me know what their concerns are, what I might have missed or not understood. And that is where one of the participants in the room got back onto me and let me know about the information that parts of Nantucket are eroding closer to 32 feet per year than the kind of 20 foot over the longer time frame. But I'd have to say, when I looked at the information, it was over a shorter time frame, so it's more condensed. So it's still valuable information that came from that meeting. This is then talking about how we talked about how the town might be able to help. We also discussed how we might have possible improvements to an airfield. They do have a little landing strip. If a dock were ever lost or unusable for a length of time, at least you might be able to fly some supplies there in an emergency situation, or use that to evacuate people as the case might be. They also looked at or discussed amongst themselves, I have to say it's discussed amongst themselves, the possibility of improvements to their boat landing and access site. And then, like I was saying, if dredging ever occurred, that the spoils could be used for beach nourishment or some other local project, depending on what might be acceptable to the community there. Like I said, Rachel was a tough act to follow. I hope that was of interest to people here, because I took a lot from this meeting and I gained a lot from this. And I know there was only 6 people in the room, but the engagement was massive. About a month ago, I had a chance to speak with the Brant Point Association. The engagement was equivalent to that, and I think there was roughly 70 people in the room that day. I got as many questions and as much feedback from 6 people as I did from close to 70 in a different event.
I'd say 6 people is actually a pretty high percentage of the population on Tuckernuck too. So. Questions and comments from committee members for Vince. Peter.
Yeah, Vince, 2 things before they slip out of my head. Number one, if the town could possibly be considering shoring up that pier that's over there. I know the pier is private, but if you put public funds into a private pier on an island that's owned privately, and if we put beach nourishment over there and improve the airstrip, you may be opening up, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but I don't know if that makes it so that if public money is going toward private improvements, even though it's part of the town, does that then invite people who want to go over there and explore Tuckernuck? And I know the Tuckernuckers are very explicit about, if you start walking inland, they want to know whose house you're staying at and who you know. And if you can't produce an answer, you're told to go back to the beach. I know that Whale Island or Whale Point is disputed, and that that's how the Tuckernuckers tolerate people on their island, relegating them to that point, going to party on that point. So there's those thoughts. And my other thoughts were, when you say keeping Tuckernuck serviceable at the F Street Pier, I've heard this expressed to me by people who own land on Tuckernuck, and in relation to what Matt said about parking, it's vital that parking be maintained on Nantucket, and not just day parking, but overnight parking. I know that's been an issue recently of finding places to park on Tennessee Ave or F Street or wherever they're going to park. And as the South Shore of Nantucket in that area erodes, and it's where are people going to? Yeah, so those are my thoughts.
So if
Thank you, Peter. Vince.
Yeah. So when we were discussing what might be done for their landing area and their piers, it was made quite clear to me quite early on and quite loudly that all they would like is just a little help with maybe design for what might be an acceptable type of landing area, or what would work, basically, just to kind of have a little study on it. They were very keen that the construction of anything would be from their side of things. They just wanted some study assistance, would be about the simplest way I could put it. Yeah, I take your point about F Street and parking. I don't know what to say about that either. There's a lot of controversy over that.
Other comments or questions? Gary?
Yes, I don't know hardly anything. I learned a lot this morning because I know very little about Tuckernuck. I didn't know that, what Peter said, it's a private island. I didn't know that. I don't know how many people live on the island. Do we know that number? And do we know, do they pay taxes to the town of Nantucket? And if so, what tax revenue does the town get? I mean, I'm just thinking about when we talk about the most important part of the coastal resilience plan itself was for us to engage in prioritization. So when we're looking at limited supply of funds and the need to make choices over where the limited funds that we have are available to deal with these issues, I kind of wonder, at what point does the town say, well, we'd love to help them, but in between the needs, we have other places where there are far more members of the town who are involved in it and much greater potential harm to the town. Why should we expend some of these limited funds for them?
So in terms of property ownership, I don't have a set number. I have something along the high 20s in mind for the number of property owners or number of habitable buildings there, is probably a nice way to put it. About 27 is what is one of the numbers I frequently hear. It might change 1 or 2 up or down from that, but 27 is about what I normally hear. So in terms of town facilities, there's only one town facility on the whole island, and it's not the pier, it's a tiny little firehouse. And it is, I got to pass it once when I was invited to stay on Tuckernuck by people on island. And it was very, very small, but it's just an emergency facility that they do need. Other than that, there is no other town property there. But if we did put money into F Street boat ramp, it wouldn't be just exclusively for use for people for Tuckernuck and Muskeget. It would have many great uses for all of Hither Creek and the general boating community. There are basically only 3 boat launch sites on the whole island. Children's Beach, F Street, and Jackson's are the 3. And the one at Jackson's is under a different threat of potential sea level rise. If anything were to happen to Millie's Bridge, if that were to ever break through, then access to that is gone. So it just makes more sense to look after F Street. And then in terms of the tax base out there, yes, they do pay taxes. And say if they have to do a house move or alteration to a house in the near wetland, they've got to go to the Concom. They're part of the county. They do have to do their due diligence as you'd expect, and they pay taxes, but I don't know how much is collected from that area. I wouldn't have even the start of an idea.
Thank you, Vincent. Ian?
Thank you, Mary. So Peter can probably add to this, but Gary brings up an interesting point, because there's been a sort of a rather uneasy relationship between some people on Tuckernuck and the town, to the extent that I remember it must have been, 15 years ago, when the town threatened to send someone over to book all their cars. At that point, none of them were inspected, none of them were insured, I don't believe. And so there was something, it was standoff. I forget how it was resolved. So it's an interesting situation.
Other comments? Okay, Vince, thank you for that presentation. It was included in our packet. Rachel, quick question. Will you be able to send the slides from your presentation to Vince for our minutes? Vince, you can reach out to Rachel.
Sorry, yes, I can do that. I just failed to unmute myself.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Next item on our agenda, I'm going to note it's 10 after 11. We have 2 remaining discussion items. I'd like to move the draft of the annual report first to make sure that we address that, because that does have a time-sensitive aspect to it. Let's do what, November 1st, Vince?
Yes, as far as I remember correct, yes.
So if there are revisions, we would hope to know about that now so that we can work on those and bring it back before the last minute. So with your permission, we'll jump to the review of the annual report. I don't expect that to take a great amount of time, but I do want to leave the rest of the meeting for discussion of the checklist for evaluating coastal projects for resilience. Vince, can you put the report up on the screen? And hopefully people had a chance to review this. It is essentially a recap of our activities for the fiscal year ending 22. And there are noted a couple of typos that we will correct, but the main question is, were there any activities left out that you would want included? Were there anything that you would want described differently? Is there anything that you would remove from the report? We had a pretty active year, so there's a lot to report on.
Can I walk through a couple of things
Yeah.
briefly, very briefly? So in the very first annual report we did, we had the names and roles of all of the committee members. That was left out last year on purpose to save space. I had to go back and check my notes for that. I did put it back in this year because there's a change in committee makeup and an expansion in the committee makeup. And there was changes through the year as well that I wanted to acknowledge. It is up to the committee to keep those in or do what you please. I just wanted everything and the kitchen sink in the report at the first draft. And I also will say loudly, I'm not precious about anything in this. This is only me just making notes that the committee can decide and edit on the as needed. I had about 2 or 3 different versions of the Coastal Resilience Plan part. Obviously, it had to go first in my mind, but if the committee wants to move it, such as the will. And I kind of overwrote this the first 1 or 2 times where I put a lot of fanfare and trumpeting on it. But then I think, well, the real thing I want people to see is the link. But if you want to add or take or subtract from this or whatever might need to happen, fair enough. Then I just went through some of the same headings we had last year, edited them, fixed them, and updated them. The main one that is new is that CRAC became a permanent committee. This obviously is new for the obvious reasons that this happened in, was it April? So this is something that could probably do with a good committee review and edit as needed. The grant applications is something else that was new as well that we didn't have before because we didn't have any before. The outreach is just updated and brought in some other aspects, and the key speakers. These are the people I consider the key speakers that we had during the year. If anyone else wants to bring in more or take some of these out, such as the committee as well. And I wanted to go into the other events because we had a not in the previous year. And then the main one that I put in was the design thinking workshop, but there was others too. And like the Climate Change Awareness Month, this was unchanged. In terms of goals, I didn't really do much for this. This is unchanged, but if the committee wants to rethink the goals, by all means. And last year we included an image. It's not in here, but I'd wanted to make sure a big shiny note. Is there any image or any particular graph or anything that the committee would want to put in? I had a thought about this, but I ended up just not putting anything in. I was just going to do something like the downtown neighborhood flood barrier through the downtown area and have that in there, but that was just my idea.
Comments? Ian?
Yes, thank you, Mary. So would you elaborate, please, Vince, on when you say participation in other, or should be in other resilience efforts? The CRAC was a stakeholder in the Baxter Road engineering feasibility assessment, and CRAC participated. I was unaware that we had. I thought you had done so on behalf of the town, and that it doesn't, in fact, involve the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee per se. We have not discussed it that I'm aware of.
So
we haven't taken a vote on whether we would support it.
So do you remember last summer and into the fall, as this was kind of getting written and coming to its final report, we had a couple of large stakeholder group meetings, and everyone was, there was about 12 different boards, committees, commissions and groups that were part of it. And CRAC and the select board and town administration were formed one of the kind of 3 main factions. The others would be SBPF and some of the like-minded organizations there, and then another side of it, the third grouping was Coastal Conservancy and other organizations that had issues with geotubes in general. So CRAC was a participant in the group discussions that we had. I think those are 2 of them, one in September and one again in early October. I have to go back and check, but that's what I'm referencing there.
Yeah, it might be helpful to think of that project in 2 phases. There was the phase that produced the Arcadis report, and then there was the phase that followed it. And we had participated in the phase that produced the Arcadis report.
Right, that I understand, but you know, it's rather politically loaded, and I don't want it to imply that CRAC is a supporter of the geotubes.
I think you're correct, Ian, to state that we have not taken a position on that project.
And could we add that, please? Something to that effect?
Yeah, I would put it right before final report, Vince. The other option would be to remove this item if people felt that that was appropriate.
No, well, sorry, Mary, if I may.
Yes, please. Ian.
No, I think it is appropriate to have it in there because, as Vince said, we did, you know, we did participate through Vince in this. I think it's important that that be noted.
Ian, just for clarity, what do you want to say? CRAC has now taken a position on geotubes. CRAC
Right.
has now taken a position on this report.
Well,
As for this project,
yes, on this
it's all
project.
inclusive, yeah.
Thank you.
Other comments?
That
Again,
actually makes
anything-
sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Vince.
That actually makes sense to me because CRAC and Select Board and I think it was Town Administration were the 3 groups that were kind of the middle ground grouping that weren't affiliated with either of the other groupings. That's why we had 3. So that does actually make a bit of sense.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, the idea to add, subtract, or edit what's here. Sarah?
I just have a kind of clarifying question, because, and forgive me if we've already discussed this piece, is this is mainly just for the CRAC in general as a group, because I know like Vince undertakes many other tasks in his position. So this isn't just like the things that, you know, this is the committee itself, right?
The committee is required to provide an annual report of its activities to the town to be included in the town's annual report. So this will go along with all the other reports from all the other committees. But yes, you're right, Sarah. It's exclusive to the committee, not inclusive of Vince's activities.
So I am going to be a squeaky wheel again and say, I think we do not include the design thinking workshop because that was a town workshop. It wasn't a CRAC workshop. And it did relate to the coastal resiliency plan, which is a plan that came out of this group, but I guess it's not a CRAC meeting. So
yeah, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee did have a representative, the
that's
single
true.
representative was a participant, but certainly open to others' comments on whether this would be included or not. Any other thoughts? Joanna?
I do think it should be included, and I understand why Sarah doesn't think so, but I do think that it was probably one of the more important points in the year where people sort of coalesced around this information, and I think that that's worth reporting.
Vince?
Can I make a suggestion? So do you remember we had this event on the it was like a Monday and Tuesday, and a few days later there was a special CRAC meeting just to get updates. Maybe we should put that in.
Yeah, we can change the wording a little bit to focus on the presentation to CRAC of the results of the workshop. Is that what you're getting at, Vince?
Yes.
Okay.
If I
Sarah?
may, it's honestly, if it's only me, then it's totally fine. It can stand. I just want to make sure, you know, it wasn't something that we put on or we did. It was the town. So while we can report our participation in it, I guess, as a representatives, I don't think that we shouldn't put it as a accomplishment of us, since it wasn't our event, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does, because the way this is written, the focus is on Arcadis activities, which is another remove from the committee's activities. So I think rewording this to focus on the committee's involvement would be appropriate. Matt?
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing. I think it's, you know, Crack participated. I also think we could say that we, you know, we've recently, and we could say we've recommended the 2 or 3 short-term items be.
We can't, Matt, because that's after June 30th.
All right.
So, yeah.
I was
We can do
just
that
thinking, the
next
more
year.
we say it, the more likely it will be to happen. All right, next
Under
time.
goals, you know, if we could, you know,
There
the
you go.
goals
Put
is
it
where it
under
gets a little
goals.
fuzzy, because that is future focused.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, but thank you for bringing that up. Vince, do you want to add a comment to the goals section to record what Matt was saying?
Sure. How would you like it phrased?
Well, for right now, I think just a comment to add the committee's endorsement of the goals of the design thinking workshop. And we can figure out exactly how to word that later.
Sure thing. So let me just make this bigger for people to see. Beg your pardon. I will work on the spellings. Is there any other section?
So any further comments on the report before we send it back to Vince for revision? If there are none, Vince, when you're ready, you can stop the screen sharing and we will go to the discussion of checklist for evaluating coastal projects for resilience. So Joanna had sort of ended that, or she didn't end it. The discussion ended with Joanna making a suggestion that perhaps a checklist of questions to review in terms of projects in coastal areas that would be developed by this committee would be helpful to others who are trying to evaluate projects and do planning. And I wanted to follow up on that. Joanne, I don't know if you want to recap what your suggestion was to get us rolling, but this grew out of the wide-ranging discussion that we've been having on shoreline access issues.
Right. So I think what I was thinking is if we could distill all of the things that we had all discussed into a short list, then it would help us better evaluate what the situation was.
Right. And so do other committee members have ideas in that direction? Either specifically for items that might be on a checklist or generally, Ian?
Yes, thank you, Mary. I do, and that brings me back to how I brought up 18 Washing Pond Road. It's the bulkhead issue. And in fact, thanks to Rachel's observation of the last meeting we had of how many Chapter 91 bulkheads were out of compliance because they didn't allow for public access, where the situation was that, you know, the Chapter 91 is a balancing act. And in order to impede the public's right of access for fishing, filing, and tidal and navigation, that's the actual wording, it has to have an overwhelming public benefit. And so Jeff drafted a letter that we approved of and that I'd like to send to Vince so that we can actually read it at our next meeting, that it can be presented at our next meeting. to the Mass DEP Waterways Program, asking them to come down and inspect the bulkheads that are out of compliance, because the actual Conservation Commission, the inland waterways, I'm not expressing this way well, but so our environmental regulations do not address the Chapter 91 issue. So we have no direct control over the waterways program. So
Ian, if I could ask for a clarification, you said that Jeff wrote a letter, you mean for the
Yes.
Concom to continue it at their next meeting? You weren't referring to for the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee to look
no,
at it?
I'm asking, I'd like it to be presented to the CRAC
Okay,
as we continue to discuss this. And the actual header for the letter that Ashley signed off on was rate Chapter 91 compliance questions and requests for inspections. Because in fact, especially on the North Shore, the bulkheads now impede any public access. And I think, you know, just to remind ourselves, as we said in this letter, you know, goals, implementation of the CRP is now a main goal of the committee. That under the executive summary on our CRP, page 12, key priorities, we list 6 key priorities. And the first priority includes the coastal viewshed and access to the water. And I shall read priority 4 in its entirety. Nature-based strategies should be implemented wherever feasible, with a clear emphasis on minimizing ecological impacts and maximizing ecological and public access benefits. Preserving Nantucket's beaches and coasts into the future for as long as possible should be a primary goal. And so I think the issue of these bulkheads is something that I'd like to see us also write a letter to the Mass Waterways to bring this to their attention. And if I may, I did meet with Mickey Rowland and Brenda McDonough at the beginning of June. We went down to the bulkhead at 18 Washington Pond Road. And Mickey is the head of the Nantucket Commission on Disabilities. And they said there was no way that someone in a wheelchair could get across. And of course, as we all know, now wheelchairless, you know, you can actually have a wheelchair with beach tires so that you can go along the beach if you choose. And so they suggested I write to William Joyce, who is the ED of the Mass Architectural Access Board, to ask his opinion about this, which I did on June 2nd. And I did not, you know, I wrote in my capacity as vice chair of CONCOM, and I did not get a reply. And so that's something that I also wonder what we can do going forward.
okay, so that was a lot.
Yes, sorry.
If I can try and
I'm
recap.
just throwing it out there, you know.
So
Like Matt, I hope some of it will stick. You know.
yeah. So Jeff has written a letter that the Concom requested and that Ashley has signed, and that letter has gone to the state requesting review of Chapter 91 licenses. Is that
Well,
correct?
yes, well, saying that they're, you know, we don't think they're in compliance here,
Right.
many of them, and that we'd like them to come down and inspect it,
Mhm.
inspect them. You know, the thing is, they have very few people work for them, it turns out. So the chances of actually getting them down to the island, it increases in proportion to how many bulkheads we can prove or we think are out of compliance, to have them come down and then make the actual order the license holders to bring them back into compliance, which is in the island's benefit, because then you can actually get over these damn things when the tide is lapping there, where otherwise, you know, it's impossible to, and in fact, I think Vince, who is a birder, can address how difficult it is to navigate the North Shore. You know, as Joe can, because as a biker, I mean, we all know how hard, it's impossible at this point, because so many of them don't provide that access as they're supposed to by law.
Okay, so I'm trying to keep the main thread of this going, but although I appreciate all of the detail because it is helpful to understand what is going on. So the letter has gone to the state, and you would like the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee at its next meeting to review the letter, and in the context of developing recommendations for preserving access to the beaches. Is that?
Yes, and send our own letter.
And send our own letter. Okay.
And discuss drafting a letter that we send to support the Conservation Commission's letter.
I see. Okay. I think I got it. Thank you. And then I would add that in the context. No, I think it was all necessary background. So thank you, Ian. But I would add that in considering what we might call a checklist, what you also mentioned, it is a goal of the Coastal Resilience Plan to preserve access for the public. And that would be a key question in the checklist is, is public access impeded, or is it not as legally required? Those might be questions that we would include. Is that?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Joanna, you had your hand up, and then Matt, I think after you.
So I heard something maybe different in what Ian was saying. He said that the Concom had potentially identified 6 questions, right, that might help. I thought that those questions might be good to add to our checklist of how to evaluate these circumstances.
No, I was reading from the key priorities in the CRP in the executive summary.
But what about, I thought you were saying something about Concom identifying 6 ways, or some ways, maybe the number wasn't 6, that they were not in compliance. Like 6 points of review.
No, I was referring specifically to bulkheads on the North Shore. So I said 6 bulkheads on the North Shore, or revetments that aren't in compliance with their Chapter 91 license. So no, we hadn't identified.
Okay, but what about, because I'm still trying to get to whatever the criteria could be, right? So if some of those ways in which they're not in compliance can lend itself to creating criteria of what would be in compliance, like how do we work with that?
So my understanding is that that the Conservation Commission and the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Commission have no legal authority to change a Chapter 91 license. That Chapter 91 license is specifically something that exists within the DEP and the waterways program. So all we can do is bring to their attention the fact that we think that there are bulkheads that are out of compliance because they are impeding the public right between the intertidal zone of fishing, fouling, and navigation. And so we do have Dylan Fernandez, and I forget the name of the other man, have for 2 or 3 years tried to add recreation to the Chapter 91 license so that you don't have to walk with a fishing pole or a pair of binoculars to allow you to walk in the intertidal zone. So, so I was saying that this is clearly within our purview, and that's why I read from our executive summary the key priorities, item number 1 and item number 4 out of the 6 key priorities.
So if I may jump in, page 12 of the CRP, the executive summary, that page reports on community engagement. So that is reporting what the Arcadis team heard from the community. It is not actually a list of recommendations that are being made by the CRP for the community. Just want to clarify the direction that information was flowing in.
Yeah.
Vince, and then Gary. I'm sorry, Matt, did I skip over you?
That's all right. You can go to those guys and come back to me.
Okay, Vince.
I'm not trying to throw a spanner in the works here. I'm just trying to, and I don't mean this in a bad way. I'm trying to find out how this is within the committee's purview, to be honest. So the committee, the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee is to give advice to the select board. If we're trying to support a position for Concom or give a specific letter, does that letter go to select board or does it go to Concom or does it go through select board to Concom? I'm stuck on that.
No, yeah, I think we should ask, if I may, Mary.
Yes, please.
We should ask the select board, we should send a letter to the select board asking them to forward it to the mass waterways, you know.
Yeah, I think that would be the appropriate channel, should the committee decide to go forward. But the first thing we would need to do is read the letter. So I'm happy to put that on our next agenda for review.
Thank you.
Okay, so Gary, I think you were next after Vince.
Yeah, I think we're getting off the track. We're not a regulatory body. I think Jeff is doing his job as the head of Natural Resource Department, bringing that issue up. I can't imagine that our charter is going to require us to go around the island to make sure everybody is complying with a whole bunch of rules that may or may not affect coastal resiliency. We should get involved if one of our priorities is a project. And in the process of figuring out how to proceed with one of our 40 priorities, we end up dealing with that particular issue, the Article 91 issue. But that's not something we're doing now. We don't have a project we're talking about. We shouldn't be a policeman, and we shouldn't be recommending that someone, that's Jeff's job, and he's doing it. We shouldn't be recommending to the select board that they have to go around. They should make sure that everyone's complying with Article 91. There's a million other laws they should also be requiring people to comply with, but I don't think that's our job.
So
May I reply?
let me read our charter, and then Ian, I'm happy to go to you. So this falls, at least generally speaking, under reviewing pertinent existing regulations to include coastal resiliency accommodations, identifying any disconnects between regulations and practice, and or conflicts, and recommend ways to achieve alignment, reviewing proposed pertinent regulations for coastal resiliency purposes. So it would certainly be a discussion that we would decide as a committee whether or not a particular action fell within that charter. But I think the discussion itself is merited. Ian?
No, thank you, Mary. I won't add anything else at this point, except I think somehow I've managed to stir too much sediment up on the issue, because it's, Jeff, we have no regulatory authority under the Conservation Commission to deal with it. So I'm not talking about policing Chapter 91 at all. I'm talking about getting DEP down to have a look at what's going on, really.
Thank you, Ian. And then Matt.
I think it's worthy of discussion. I think it's a beach access, fishing, fouling, navigation, maybe, you know, maybe Julian and Dylan will, you know, be able to add recreation. But I think as a principle, we should be including those in coastal resiliency and in anything we do. So I think it's an appropriate sort of conversation. And, you know, I'm a little worried that Ian was getting paid by the word early on and, you know, confused us a little bit. So let's keep it simple.
Yeah, I seem to be getting very good at that in general. I do apologize.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so back within the concept of a checklist that would assist Nantucket's boards in reviewing projects for coastal resilience impacts. So Ian has made some suggestions. Do we have other suggestions for what might be on that checklist? Or just discussion of the concept of a checklist itself? Sarah?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I apologize for not being prepared with the checklist, but with checklist ideas, but I do think that this is a good thing to provide. Obviously we can't mandate anyone use the checklist, but I think for certain boards, like we heard from for planning and things, that it would be useful for those that are interested. So I kind of taking a step back, I guess, is in providing this is a courtesy, providing we'd send it to the select board and then they could then disperse it similar to our recommendation prior.
Correct. Yeah, as Vince has pointed out, we advise the select board. So if we developed a checklist, we would submit it to the select board, and our advice would be to recommend it to other town boards for their use.
I would support it, and we have the plan to back up. Like we have looked into this in great detail. I would like a little more time to think of some of the additional checklists, but I think in general it's worthy to do.
Yes, Vince?
I know that the big discussion has been around access and getting to the beach and being able to move along a walkable beach and such. But there's other things that I have ideas about potentially including this checklist that might be valuable to this committee to think about at this time. Sea level rise is topmost on my list always, and having whoever is reviewing these review and be aware of sea level rise scenarios. Just in an advisory capacity, they don't have to take it into account because we have no legal standing to do that, but just make them aware of it. Same with erosion zones, and this could go for North Shore, like Ian is talking about, because they are erosion zones, and anywhere on the South and East Shore as well, and particularly parts within the harbour. But for the North Shore, South and East Shores, we have erosion hazard mapping. People could review that and be aware of that. Again, not in a regulatory way, but an advisory way, and flood zones as well.
Sarah?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Sort of to Vince through Mary, and to Joanna too, who brought up this idea. I think it's important to point those out, but how do you imagine for like a checklist? So sea level rise, would it be like, have you reviewed the sea level rise scenarios in this area? Or are we thinking like, is this within, like putting does this project fall within erosion zone, blah, 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 but like thinking of like a more vulnerable area. And then if so, maybe there's like a separate checklist for like the super vulnerable, like probably don't want to build in your areas versus the just have you reviewed stuff. I'm just thinking of like how is this being imagined as you think of erosion and sea level rise?
So if I might, Mary, so just to look at two vastly different parts of the island where you're going to get these things of interest. So if you look at, I don't know, a high bluff area, Baxter Road, they're not going to be too worried about sea level rise in pure numbers and how high the water comes, but they're certainly going to be worried about what that does to increasing the erosion rate. So that's the important thing to know there. And if you're, say, somewhere closer to the downtown area, and you're in a flood zone close to, say, Brown Point, I pick on Brown Point all the time, but if you want to do a development there and on the waterfront, to know what your risk might be there too, just to be able to check it off so that you know about it. That's kind of the way that I was thinking about it, because there's so much variability here. Then one of the ones that bugs me just a little bit is developments around, say, a pond. I'm just going to pick the name of the pond, Capon Pond for the sake of argument, where it might breach over time and infill with water, with tidal water, and become potentially connected to Nantucket Sound. Then if that becomes tidally influenced, then you want to build around the edge of that pond or any pond that's similarly breached, or it could be Long Pond as well, then to know your risk. That's the kind of things that I was thinking about.
Thank you, Vince. I hear one of the things that I have seen have come up a few times is sort of a knee-jerk reaction where people say, oh, well, sea level is going to rise, so you can't build there. And I don't think that's the appropriate way to approach it. As Vince said, it's more about knowing the risks, knowing what measures will reduce your risk, knowing what the time frame is that you have to consider before that risk becomes more certain. there's a lot of nuance in evaluating each situation. And that's why I like Joanna's idea of a checklist. I don't know if we'd quite go to like a point system. I don't think that would really be helpful, but just asking or providing the information, creating awareness, and asking people to balance these various factors as they consider a project, I think is really helpful to people who haven't had to think about this before. And as an example, going back, I think, to 2019, when the Neighborhood First funding was passed through town meeting, and they started thinking of guidelines of what would their checklist be for a property to evaluate whether it was suitable for that program. I attended one of their meetings and I said, would you add to your checklist of questions, is the property in a FEMA flood zone? Will flooding be a risk that you need to consider for this property? And it isn't a black and white, if it's in a FEMA flood zone, we can't consider it. It's if it's in a FEMA flood zone, we have to evaluate the risk to that property and balance that risk against all of the other factors that are present on the property to decide whether the property is an appropriate fit for this program. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to get to with the idea of a checklist. And Joanna, if I'm not on target, please move us in a different direction.
No, you are, Mary. Thank you. And I have maybe just one suggestion, because I'm going to try to hop off so I can go to the housing hearing. Maybe we need to look at this in two tracks. Like, one track would be, is this a municipal project? Right? These are the questions, or evaluating like even 10 things to consider, or is this a private project? And these are 10 things to consider, right? Because the rules are going to be slightly different. But you're on the right track, Mary. I got a little bit derailed because of Ian, sorry, Ian. And I started thinking, is he talking about making this be about, the Chapter 91 thing and about how to evaluate projects that are going onto the water? But I got lost there. So now we're back onto the track of, no, municipal projects, private projects, 10 points, keep it simple.
Thank you, Joanna.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I like the way Joanna's thinking. Joanna, would you have any free time in the next while just to meet up or even for a phone call and briefly jot down some of these things to bring back to another crack meeting, just to help me and the committee?
Okay, Matt?
I'm not sure. I think we can give best practices or give out that information. I think it's more a disclosure that people who are buying and building in these areas understand the risks. And I think that can happen through, there are websites that sort of will lay out the risks, and they're interactive. They'll let you, look 30 years out, 40 years out. You can put your own things in. I think it's more a disclosure situation in my mind than it is us trying to think through all the different things that could go wrong. So I'm looking at it more from that perspective. Now, for the town, maybe there does need to be a checklist. We spend, and the other part about the town and or the private individuals, I think people will pay more attention if they think they're going to have to pay for it, either as a neighborhood or as an individual. If they think they can build it and make it more valuable and then have the town save them, they're going to make a different decision. So I think it's important that we have a sort of going forward, we have a policy that the neighborhood is paying for it themselves or paying most of it or something, because then when people do a disclosure and look, they'll be thinking about, oh, this will be on me. If they can say, oh, well, the town will save me, then they're going to spend a lot more money. So those are the issues I think that we need to be grappling with, more so than trying to figure out each thing that could go wrong,
Thank you, Matt. Other comments? If there are none, the next item on our agenda is New Business Committee and Natural Resources Department reports. So Vince and I did appear at the Select Board meeting on August 17th and presented the proclamation to declare September Climate Change Awareness Month. Libby said that was accepted. I don't know, Vince, if we have a signed copy at this point, but I know the Select Board has not been meeting because of the summer hiatus. So hopefully we'll have that at least first week in September. And then we also presented the second quarter report, and If you have an opportunity, you might want to take a look at that. The select board, several select board members did offer their thanks and appreciation for the work the committee has done. And so I wanted to make sure we pass that along to everybody. And we appreciated that, that feedback very much. Vince, anything you want to add there?
No, you covered it. They were astounded at the work the committee is doing. They're very appreciative of it, and it's everything Mary said.
Okay. And then also the Monomoy Civic Association has developed a draft of an area plan for the Monomoy area that was presented yesterday at the NPNEDC meeting. And the point to notice there is that they voluntarily added a section to their report for coastal resilience. And let me just briefly read. So they added a section, climate adaptation and resilience to support Nantucket's coastal resilience plan, including recommendations that address the creeks and nature-based approaches to improve flood resilience and stormwater management. So I just wanted to note that it's wonderful to see that there are other groups that are incorporating the recommendations of the coastal resilience plan and reviewing it and considering how it would apply in their neighborhoods. And that draft plan is still a work in progress. So that will come back at the September meeting, and then there will be a public hearing for it. Are any other reports from committee members, Vince?
No,
And then
not a
Ian.
report. I just, when I read this plan, I was super happy with it. And they had a questionnaire and survey, and one of the questions was about support for the CRP. About 35% people said they didn't know enough, but most people were just satisfied with it. So that's just a nice thing to point out.
Thank you, Vince. Ian?
Yes, thank you, Mary. I'll be brief this time. Concom is getting closer to updating its local regulations and having a public meeting on it. And so the updated regulations are on the website, I believe, or I could ask Vince to get the copy from Jeff and post it so that we all have access to it. And I urge everybody to, to have a look because of the additional pressures that we have on our natural resources. We're trying to take that into account. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Other committee reports? If there are none, we'll take a motion to, so next meeting dates would be September 13th and 27th. I'll just note Vince has some vacation time in there. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to get through that draft annual report so that he could not have to think about it while he was on vacation. And so our next meeting dates, as I said, September 13 and 27. As always, if you're not able to attend, let Vince know in advance. That's very helpful. And we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Peter.
Second.
Thank you, Ian. That was short and sweet, Ian. Thank you. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Rachel Freeman,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Christy Kickham.
Aye.
Joanna Roach did leave at about 10 minutes too. Joe Topham
Aye.
and Mary Longacre, aye. Thank you all. We'll see you in September. Enjoy the rest of the summer.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, Sarah, for doing the